Okay, so it is 5 p.m. today, and the chair calls this meeting into order. Want to make sure and see if we can have quorum. So I'll start with those present with me. So Trustee Kate.
Present.
Present, okay. Trustee Murillo.
Present.
Trustee Vogt is not here. Trustee Sullivan.
Here.
Trustee Ayers-Wilson. Trustee Pierce.
Here.
And Trustee Stoma. So we do have quorum. If you can please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Of the United States of America, which stands one nation
Under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dr. Head, has the meeting notice been properly posted and certified?
Yes, I certify it was posted in accordance with the law.
Okay, our next item is the redistricting public hearing. I don't think we have any public comment. Just want to make sure, Desiree, do we have public comment?
We do not have anyone signed up for public comment tonight.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Our next item is the presentation of map 6 and map 6A.
Good evening, board members, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm here tonight with my colleagues, Paige Martin and Matthew Cluck, and we are coming to the end of a long process, but a process where there's been a lot of hard and good work, and I am pleased with where we are in the process. Tonight, we are talking about two things. We are providing information to the public in the form of our public hearing, and we're also zeroing in on map 6 and 6A. If you will remember, map 6 was the last consensus map that came out of the redistricting committee as well as the full board. But then we were tasked with doing a final check of map 6 with respect to precinct splits, minimizing those splits, and then doing a Voting Rights Act analysis. And so we have information to present on both of those issues. As a result of that, it is the redistricting committee's recommendation that the board consider map 6A because it minimizes some additional precinct splits without messing with or disturbing some of the important demographic changes that were made to get to map 6 that help us comply with both state and federal law. So at this point, with the board's permission, since this meeting is being recorded and we could have people participating online, I'd like to go forward with the public hearing presentation and then see if we have any comments and then answer any questions that you might have with respect to map 6 and 6A.
Yes. Okay, let's go forward that. Please note that Trustee Ayers-Wilson is available to us online. Thank you, ma'am, for participating.
So I'll begin just sort of setting up kind of all of our objectives for tonight. And since there could be members of the public either joining us in person or online who are joining us for the first time in this journey together, we are going to do a brief legal overview. I know for people who have been actively watching and participating in the community meetings, the public education forums, the special board meetings, and the redistricting committee meetings, you're already well-versed in the legal analysis and the legal requirements. But because this is part of our official record and our public hearing, I want to make sure that that is included, particularly for anyone who may just be joining this journey. Then to remind the board about our board adopted timeline and the opportunities for public input at different on-ramps in the process. And then before we take a look at our final map 6A, want to remind you of the constraints we've been working on. Some have been imposed upon us by court order and others by locally determined map drawing constraints. Then I want to review how we got from maps 1 to 6 so that we understand how we got to map 6. Map 6 really is a combination of public and trustee comments, which we'll go over to refresh everyone's memory. And then the last 2 assignments that we were tasked with as your legal team and your demographic team was to look at the precinct splits, because that's one of your redistricting criteria, and then do one final pass through of looking at your influence districts and your opportunity districts with an eye towards compliance with the Voting Rights Act. So we'll present that analysis. We'll present, as we always do, I think it's probably one of our favorite set of charts, your legal team and your demographic team, which is to compare all of your single member districts from 2010 to 2020 and under each of your maps so that you can see the demographic changes under those criteria. And then we'll go to next steps. So that's kind of a hefty agenda. We're trying to accomplish 2 things. That is, invite the public in if they are joining us for the first time to understand how we got to map 6 and map 6A in the process. Take any comments if there are any from anyone who is here in the audience, and then zero in on the board's questions or requests that got us from map 6 to map 6A. And then we'll end with talking about next steps. You do have 2 more meetings scheduled, another redistricting committee meeting on June 16th, and a final meeting where the board is prepped or set to finally adopt a map. It is the redistricting committee's recommendation that the committee meeting on the 16th is not needed, or potentially not needed, depending on our work here today, because the committee has completed the last of its assignments, which was to look at the voting rights analysis and precinct splits. So if there's no additional changes that are made by the full board today or requested by the full board today, we're really ready to go on to final adoption on the 29th. Because our board adopted timeline was board adopted in order to cancel that redistricting committee meeting on the 16th, it is our recommendation that the board take a formal vote to amend the timeline, to cancel that meeting, and to move forward with the final adoption meeting on June 29th. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to call my colleague Paige Martin up to give a brief legal overview to explain what it is that we've been doing and some of the constraints we've been working under.
Thank you, Ms. McBride.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Lisa said, I know that most of you in here are very familiar with the legal overview, but we also realize that there may be people either attending in person or viewing us online who aren't familiar with the redistricting process and the legal overview. So we wanted to take just a few minutes, I promise, to do the legal overview, to give you a legal overview of the redistricting process. And the easiest way to do that is by answering 4 general questions: what, why, when, and how. So what is redistricting? Well, redistricting is the process by which boundaries of elective districts or units are periodically redivided or redrawn in response to changes in population. How do we know the changes in the population? Well, we receive the census data every 10 years from the U.S. Census Bureau, and that lets us know whether or not we have to redistrict. So Lone Star College system is currently divided into 9 single member districts. So those are the elective units that have to be withdrawn once we receive the census data and realize that if the trigger's met, which I'm going to talk about next, that we have a duty to redistrict. So why do we redistrict? Well, state law says, it's actually in the education code, says that if the census data indicates that the population of the most populous district exceeds the population of the least populous district by more than 10%, then we have to redistrict. And unfortunately, it rarely happens that the most populous district and the least populous district are right next to each other on the map. And if they were, you could just easily move population from the most populous district to the least populous district and be done with it. Unfortunately, it often happens, and Lone Star is the case as well, that the most populous district and the least populous district aren't right next to each other. And so all of the districts have to move people in and out in order to rebalance and to redraw the line so that all of the districts have roughly equal population. So when do we have to be done with the redistricting process? Well, the state law, again, says not later than the 90th day before the day of the first regular trustee election, at which trustees may officially recognize and act on the census data. It has to be completed 90 days before that first election. And so Lone Star College system has elections on even number of years. And so the first election with which we could react to the census data is the November 8th election coming up in later in this year. And so 90 days before November 8th is August 10th, 2022. So that's when state law requires us to be done with the redistricting process. The board decided very early on that they wanted to be done before that, because the problem with the August 10th date is it falls in the window of when candidates can apply to have a place on the ballot. And so the board decided early on to back that process, so back the deadline up to the end of June, because candidates can start to apply to be on the ballot in mid-July. And so the board wanted the whole redistricting process to be completed by the end of June, so that by mid-July, when people can start applying to be on the ballot, they know what district they reside in. And so the board decided to set the end of June as the deadline, as the target for us to complete the redistricting process. And we're well on the way to wrapping things up by the end of June. So how? The last question is how. We talked about the trigger, and we're here today because we know that this 2020 census data let us know that the most populous district and the least populous district, the difference in those populations exceeds 10%. So we have to redraw the boundary lines. But as Lisa mentioned earlier, there are constraints. As you can imagine, there are hundreds and hundreds of ways that the boundary lines could be redrawn. But we have to follow both state and federal law, an additional legal requirement in the form of a consent decree, as well as practical considerations. And so Lisa's going to talk more about that in a minute. But we're here today to hopefully give you an idea of how this entire redistricting process has gone. It's been very efficient and done very well. And we think we're in a place where we're meeting, we're complying with the laws and meeting as many criteria as we can. And we're happy today to be here to present the maps to you.
So as Paige indicated, we're working on this process pursuant to a timeline that's dictated by statute. And essentially this board adopted a timeline that allows you to be done with this process well in advance of the statutory deadline in August of 2022. You're going to be done in June of 2022. And just to refresh your memory and those members of the public who are just joining us, this board began this process well over a year ago. This timeline only really reflects the meetings since the board adopting the redistricting criteria process and timeline, but the full board as well as the redistricting committee to begin planning for this process and beginning learning the law began having meetings earlier in 2021. So this has been a very long process. You've had a combination of full board meetings to consider the redistricting process, as well as committee meetings chaired by Trustee Sullivan and included Trustee Pierce and Trustee Murillo on the redistricting committee to really wind down and look at specific issues that were delegated to it by the board. And you've also had community meetings in each single member district, as well as a public education forum to present the census data to the public, as well as tonight's public hearing. And so to put it in summary, you've had 4 special board meetings on redistricting, 3 redistricting committee meetings, 1 public education forum, 10 community meetings, tonight's public hearing. And then of course, throughout this process, you've had a dedicated website on which you've maintained all of your redistricting information, every single presentation, every single audio of a public meeting or a community meeting, and all of the maps, and a vehicle for the public to provide comments on each one of the maps and to get questions answered. And then I've included just an example of the front page of your redistricting website. It includes all the plans that the public could have commented on. This is just a snippet showing Plan 1, but it also includes Plan 6 and now Plan 6A, which is the recommendation of the redistricting committee. So a lot of opportunities, not only for trustee input, but public input, and a lot of varieties, whether it was at board meetings, community meetings, public education forums, public hearing, or through the website, participating in things on the website, online, or actually submitting written comments. Now, as Paige indicated, this process was tipped off by looking at your data and how it's changed, your total population data, as well as your voting age population and your citizen voting age population, and how it's changed from 2010 to 2020. The difference between your most and least populous district exceeds 10%, you're required to rebalance. So I'm going to call up our demographer, Matthew Cluck, to tell you a little bit about that data. And I know that the board, you're very well versed on this data. You know that we were required to redistrict because, spoiler alert, we were above that 10%. But again, for those who are just joining us in this process, we'll just do a brief review of that, Matthew.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you all so much for having me. Good evening. Pleasure to be here. So just to start off, we are looking at our current boundaries in place for Lone Star College, the map there. And we constructed that map out of census blocks from the U.S. Census Bureau. So if we go to the next slide here, we're looking at 2010 census data here. So the census blocks behind those boundaries, the data here is showing data from 2010. So the key number there right in the middle is that 7.3% differential. So that's below our 10% threshold that we needed to reach when this was drawn. And then our 9-district average, 198,000 persons in the red there. And then also our opportunity district, District 4, had 51% citizen voting age population percent for our Hispanic numbers. And then also we wanted to look at districts 2, 3, and 6. Those are our influence districts. So what an influence district is, we're trying to maintain Hispanic and African-American citizen voting age population percentages above 50%. So those were criteria all done in 2010 when the current boundary was drawn. So skipping ahead 10 years, we have new census data from the Census Bureau, keeping boundaries intact. The data changes behind those blocks. So now our percent differential between the most and least populous districts is at 38%. So our most populous district, District 1, has grown tremendously, 279,000 persons, and our least populous district is District 4 at 202,000 persons. So you can see our 9-district average has increased up to 251,434 persons. And with plans we're going to draw, we're going to have to get sub 10% with any boundary move we do. That's our first step in redrawing our maps. And then we're also going to have to look at our opportunity and influence districts as well, and then build on those plans with further criteria suggested from the board and public comment too. I believe Lisa, yep.
So as Matthew has summarized, we definitely under the law had to redistrict because you were at 38%. And as Paige indicated, this process is all about rebalancing population. Your population centers were in the northern portion of your district, and your smaller population centers were in the southern portion of your district. And so this process has been about moving population southward. But in doing that, we had some constraints, some imposed upon us by a voluntary court order entered into by the Lone Star College system in 2013, where you move from an at-large system to a single member district district system, and some of them locally imposed upon yourself by this board because they're objective map drawing principles. And I just want to review those because it's those constraints combined with the 10% rule that really guided our work to get from maps 1 through map 6 and ultimately to map 6A. So they really form the foundation of the work in this process. So the consent decree in 2013 required, number one, that the district move from at-large to single-member districts, with one of your single-member districts being majority citizen voting age Latino. So an opportunity district on the basis of citizen voting age population of Latino citizens. And so we have to maintain that in any map where we are rebalancing the population pursuant to the 2020 census numbers. In addition, the 2013 consent decree required that the system maintain 2 influence districts, and influence districts were defined by the court as a combination of citizen voting age population of African Americans and Latinos. So considering their citizen voting age population in a particular single member district, they have to be able to influence the electoral system. So it doesn't have to be as strong as an opportunity district where if everyone is participating, they have an opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. With respect to your influence district, if everyone is participating in that 2 demographic groups, African American and Latino, they have an opportunity to influence, meaning that they have to be sought after in order for there to be electoral success. So one influence district on the basis of citizen voting age population for Hispanics, and 2 influence districts, combination African-American and Latino. At the beginning of the decade, before doing anything, single member district 4 was your opportunity district, and you actually had 3 influence districts. So 1 additional influence district than your 2013 consent decree required, and all 6, now 7 maps that have been presented from the board maintain that and do a little bit better. So we're doing very good with respect to that criteria. In addition to the court-imposed criteria on our map drawing process, the board locally adopted some criteria that had to be kept in mind and consulted when drawing each of the maps. And each of the maps reflect these criteria, 9 of them. And I know that you all are very familiar with them, but again, for the public who may be joining us for the first time today, first criteria is when deciding where to put the dividing line between single member districts, use easily identifiable criteria, a stream, a road, city limit, county line, things of that nature. Single member districts, in order to comply with the law, are going to be drawn to be as nearly of equal population as practicable. It doesn't have to be exactly equal, but as Matthew pointed out, your average population or ideal size has grown substantially. And at the beginning of the decade, you had single member districts that were very much under that ideal size and single member districts that were very much over that ideal size. And so each of the 6, now 7 maps attempts to bring those closer into balance and bring them closer to that ideal size. They're not exactly that, but they're closer to that. And that's what gets us under that 10% threshold. And then the third criteria is exactly that 10% rule, meaning that not only were we triggered to redistrict because we were greater than 10% between our most and least populous district, but each map you considered to be compliant with the Voting Rights Act and state law had to bring you under that 10%, and they did. The fourth criteria is that single member districts shall be compact and to the extent possible contiguous, and they are. The 2013 map that was pre-cleared not only by the Department of Justice, but also by a court was compact. And we use that as a baseline. So we didn't fix things that weren't broken. So we tried to maintain the shape of your 2013 map and only make moves as necessary to comply with the other criteria, federal and state law. And all of your single member districts are contiguous. They're touching each other. You can trace your system with a pencil without having to lift your pen or pencil. We have not drawn any of the trustees out of their current single member districts. You know, being a resident of your single member district is a requirement to be elected to serve. And so we've maintained that in each of the 7 maps that have been presented to the board, which was a redistricting or a map drawing principle. The 6th map drawing principle is that we shall maintain communities of interest and avoid splitting neighborhoods to the extent possible. And that is really how you get from maps 3 to map 6, is the board as well as your public did a lot of hard work in looking at neighborhoods and looking at boundaries between single member districts. And those were the minor tweaks that were made to get from map 3 to get to map 6. Map 1 and 2 were just 2 experiments on how to rebalance your population. Map 1 went clockwise, map 2 went counterclockwise, if you think of your system as a circle in terms of balancing population. Single member district number 7 was avoid splitting county election precincts to the extent possible. And if you will recall, the approach of this board was to deal with the 8 criteria that we're talking about today first in terms of the maps that were presented to the board. And once we got the numbers required by state and federal law that would allow you to comply with state and federal law, then we looked at a map 6A so to the extent that there were any precinct splits that could be unsplit, that could be fixed without being detrimental to the numbers you need in order to comply with state federal law, then we did that in map 6A. Map 8 is a requirement to comply with the Voting Rights Act. Not only do you as a system have to comply with the Voting Rights Act, but you have to comply with the very specific requirements of that consent decree. So by complying with the consent decree, maintaining your opportunity districts and at least 2 influence districts, you are complying with the Voting Rights Act, because you just have more particularized responsibilities under the Voting Rights Act because of that consent decree. And then the last map drawing principle was, again, what I said was the baseline. We used your benchmark 2013 map as a base and only made moves as necessary and to the narrow extent necessary to comply with the other 8 map drawing principles or to comply with your consent decree, state or federal law. So that's basically what criteria number 9 says, is existing single member districts shall be preserved to the extent possible. So based on the fact that your demographic data said that you were over the 10% rule and we needed to rebalance, but in rebalancing, we had to comply with the 3 requirements of your consent decree and the 9 requirements of your map drawing principles. That is how we came up with the proposed maps that the board has been considering. And we have been going through an iterative process to fine tune those maps in order to find the map that best fits those 9 map drawing principles and 3 requirements of your consent decree. So I'm going to call Matthew back up to briefly walk through maps 1 through 5 and to talk more in detail about map 6 and map 6A.
Okay, so maps 1 and 2 were just our first go at it. We presented maps 1 and 2 together, and they were just using the criteria of getting things under 10% and maintaining those opportunity and influence districts. So just to kind of describe how we're showing the maps here. So that blue line is the current boundary in place. And then when the color bleeds over, that's where you see the changes that we made for our plans, circled in black too. So we showed 2 maps from the onset, and then from there, map 1 was kind of chosen as the favorite to work from. And then we kept iterating and kept evolving maps. So our map 3 is based on our map 1, and based on feedback, we made an adjustment in order to keep Cypress Center in District 1. And we also wanted to keep Atascocita Center and the Process Technology Center in District 8. So we made that adjustment as well. And also for District 3, we needed population into District 3, but we changed the direction from which we're gaining that population from District 1 and instead gaining that population from District 6 and 4. So map 4 was created based on Plan 3, another iteration, except this time with map 4, we added all of Humble ISD into District 8 based on a request, and adding all of Humble ISD caused some waterfall effects too, where we had to make adjustments to other districts, of course. So those adjustments didn't quite line up with our influence numbers that we wanted. So with our map 5, we decided to stick with Plan 3 to build off of. So map 5 is an iteration of 3. This time we're in Districts 9 and District 6. That boundary was smoothed out. We worked with the trustees on smoothing out that boundary to better suit their representation there. And the effects of smoothing out that boundary led to some adjustments to the other districts as well. And now map 6, where we're finally at here today, some further adjustments based on map 5, where District 1 decided we wanted to lose some population towards the northeast side of Highway 290 to help out the influence numbers for Districts 3 and District 6. And also kind of going hand in hand with that, we wanted District 6 not to lose population and kind of that boot shape to the south to District 1. So, okay. So now we have the numbers, the demographic numbers for Plan 6, like we showed earlier with our 2010 and 2020 census numbers. So Plan 6 gets us under that key 10% number with our most populous district being District 7 now, and our least populous being District 4. And finding the differential of those two, we have 9.8%. And we're also, of course, maintaining our CVAP percentage number of 51.8% for District 4, and Districts 2, 3, and 6. We maintain our influential status with combining Hispanic CVAP numbers and African-American CVAP numbers as well. So Lisa's going to go over public and trustee comments now.
So of course, what was driving the move from maps 1 to 6 was trustee input and public input, which I've cataloged on the next slide for you, and which map responds to the request, either from the public or from the trustee. We've gone over this. Actually, Matthew has gone over some of them, so I won't go over every single one of these. I just want to make sure that the public knows and the trustee knows that we were keeping a catalog of all requests, and those requests really were the driving force of each new iteration of a map. So for example, there was a request after looking at maps 1 and 2 that with respect to map 1, single member District 1 would lose the Cypher Center to single member District 3, and the request was that it be placed back in single member District 1. Maps 3, 5, 6, and 6A comply with that request. And that's the way to read each one of these. The request is in black, and then in red in parentheses is which map complies with that request. You can see that Plan 4 or map 4 is the one that places all of Humble in single member District 8. But as Matthew indicated, doing that caused some ripple effects in other single member districts. And so that's why we moved on to map 5, which deals with some of the other requests that are on this particular list. The last request, which came from the redistricting and the full board, and it's based on your redistricting criteria, is to minimize precinct splits. And so that's map 6A. So you will see that each map, as we get higher in the train, going from 3, 5, 6 to 6A complies with more and more requests, and Plan 6A is the map that complies with all of your requests the best, including minimizing precinct splits. So I just think this is a nice visual so you can see which map complies with which request and which map complies with the most requests, so that when we say 6A is the map that does that, you can visually see. We got 2 additional public comments very early on in the process, and they were public comments with respect to Plan 2 and Plans 1 and 2. We've obviously moved on from those plans to Plans 3, 4, 5, and 6. The first comment there was acknowledging support for Plan 2 and expressing some concern about the way some of the single member districts were drawn to maximize minority presence in that particular single member district. But as you know, and as we've explained today, we have a consent decree that requires us to do that, required us to do it in 2013, and requires us to maintain that. The second request there is a notice that Tomball is split between single member district 5 and single member district 9 under Plans 1 and 2. Unfortunately, under Plans 3, 4, 5, 6, and 6A, it continues to be split between those single member districts because we need it to be split in order to maintain the population balance that we need, which is the trigger for this entire process. So every comment that we received from the public, as well as from trustees, were considered, and a map was drawn to reflect that, if possible, if it was a legal request, and if it was a request that we could not honor for a legal reason. We've stated that in the materials we're presenting to you today. But just wanted you to see that we took feedback seriously, and it really drove the map iteration process. And so now the last thing that the board asked us to consider, because it's criteria number 7, is, to the extent possible, minimize precinct splits. So map 6 was the best map that complied with public request, trustee request, complied with the 10% rule, complied with your consent decree, and complied with the other elements of your locally adopted map drawing principles. Precinct splits are subordinate to everything else. So it's the last thing that we considered. If everything else is in place, all things considered, let's try to minimize precinct splits. And so I'm going to bring Matthew back up here to tell you about under map 6, where the precinct splits are, and then the proposal for unsplitting some of those. And we've tried to do that so that it doesn't affect any of your numbers with respect to your influence districts, your opportunity districts, and then doesn't significantly affect any of your other districts. I think you might see a percentage or a half a percentage or a tenth of a percentage, but we tried to be very, very careful not to impact any of the demographic numbers that you're required to maintain either under state or federal law. So Matthew.
All right, so our last bit of criteria, right, is checking on the precincts that have been split under our Plan 6. So what we did was we brought in all of our precincts from Montgomery County, Harris County, and San Jacinto County. And then we overlaid those on our Plan 6, and we found which ones were split between districts. So the map you're looking at here just includes those split precincts, just kind of for visual sake. It's hard to include every precinct. So we're just looking at the split ones here. To the north, the ones with the pinkish label, those are all in Montgomery County. Those are all your split precincts in Montgomery County, to the north of that dashed line. And then to the south of the dashed line with the black labels, those are all your split precincts in Harris County. So the number of split precincts under Plan 6, we had 54 split precincts. So what we did was we went in there and we looked at the minimal amount of change to the population numbers that we could do while unsplitting precincts. So that's kind of our 6A. So 6A, now you're looking at where we unsplit our precincts is that green fluorescent color. Those are all the ones that are fixed under 6A. So we made adjustments to the census blocks. We reassigned some of those where there was very little population, sometimes no population, where it's kind of rural, and we cleaned it up to where there was minimal impact on the actual demographics of the plan. So looking at the numbers, they're going to look very similar to Plan 6, and that's the idea, right? You don't want to make large changes this late in the project. So our 9.8 differential is the exact same as it was with map 6, and our least and most populous districts remain how they were, of course, and our influence and opportunity districts all remain the same percentage wise. So now we're going to look at every iteration of every plan, district by district. So the first two columns, we're looking at District 1. The first two columns are the 2010 census numbers under the current boundaries that were drawn in 2013. And then 2020 census numbers is that next column. And then following that is every plan we've done throughout this process. And we're just going to really highlight how Plan 6 and 6A are related here. So with District 1, there wasn't any adjustment, any unsplit precincts done. So the numbers are going to be the same, right? So the total population, 245,674. That's the exact same between Plan 6 and 6A because there was no adjustments done there. Now, District 2, there was an adjustment for unsplit precincts. So 169 persons were added after this precinct adjustment versus Plan 6 to 6A. But we still maintain District 2's influential status. At the bottom there, we're at 58.8% when we combine our Hispanic and African American percentages. So we actually increase a 0.1 percentage point, so that's even better, right? So District 3, we did have a little adjustment, 23 persons lost in District 3, 6 versus 6A. But again, like District 2, we maintain our influential district status, same total at 54%. So no large change there with just 23 persons. District 4, again, very small amount of change here. So I'm sorry, District 4 had no change. So 6 and 6A, there was no change, and it still remained our opportunity district. There wasn't any sort of opportunity to unsplit districts without affecting our population numbers in a negative way. So we didn't make any adjustments there. District 5, no adjustments were made. 6 versus 6A, no precincts were available to unsplit easily. District 6, only 6 persons, I'm sorry, that's, 6 persons lost there with in respect to Plan 6 and 6A. But of course, we're still remaining our influence district numbers with those adjustments. District 7, we are looking at, or I'm sorry, District 8, we're looking at the biggest change with our precinct adjustments with 382 persons added compared to Plan 6. So, but with District 8, we aren't looking at our influence numbers really. We're just making sure everything's in balance. So we could change a few more things than we could compare to the other districts. And finally, District 9, our last district, 218 persons lost with our Plan 6A versus Plan 6. So with that, Lisa is going to go over the VRA analysis. Thank you.
And as we indicated from the beginning of this process, that if any of your influence districts or opportunity districts under the new plan were relatively close to where they were in 2013, given that there had been population shifts over the decade, that we'd send that information off to an expert to look at your voting and elections history to make sure that that expert similarly agreed that it's not just good in terms of numbers on paper, but in terms of your election history, that person, in their opinion, didn't find any vote dilution or retrogression. And so you've been given a copy of the full report. But to summarize what Dr. Alford, who is a professor at Rice, concluded is that the demographic changes in proposed Plan 6 relative to the demographics in the existing plan, your existing plan is the 2013 plan that was adopted pursuant to the consent decree, do not suggest any retrogression in minority representation. Similarly, these demographics, together with existing proportionality and representation, do not suggest that the proposed plan dilutes minority representation. And so what that means, to kind of unpack that very kind of hefty conclusion, is that your existing plan had proportionality. The trustees on this board reflect the demographics in your system, and the new plan reflects the demographic changes over the decade. So over the decade, Anglo population has decreased in a number of single member districts. So you began the decade with 5 single member districts that were majority Anglo, and 3 that were influence districts, and 1 that was a Hispanic opportunity districts. You really now have 4 influence districts, because single member district number 1, when in 2013 was plurality Anglo, meaning Anglos weren't greater than 50% of the population in that single member district, but they were the single largest demographic group. They're no longer under your proposed plan, Plan 6 and 6A. They're at about 43%, and Hispanics and African Americans in District 1 together are at 44%. So they together are their largest demographic group. So the new plan kind of reflects the trend in your demographics over the decade have been captured in proposed Plan 6 and proposed Plan 6A. The expert also looked at your 3 influence districts and noted that they continue to be influence districts, districts 2, 3, and 6. And obviously your opportunity district continues to be one at 51.8% Hispanic citizen voting age population, very close to where it was in 2013. And it has been functioning as an opportunity district under those demographic numbers, and there's no expectation that it wouldn't continue to do so with those similar numbers. We had a Herculean task to add almost 40,000 people to that single member district at the same time maintaining the demographic ratios to keep it an opportunity district. And we had to do that by taking population from the single member districts that surround a single member district 4, which are your influence districts, single member districts 2, 3, and 6. So the ability to maintain them as an influence district and to add yet another influence district, you guys have done very good work in trying to make sure this board, as well as the demography of your single member districts, reflect the diversity of your community generally. And that was the expert's conclusion. So before going to next steps, if it is appropriate, Madam Chair, I would take any questions from the public or from trustees.
Trustees, do you have any questions on the presentation? Do we have any public comments or anyone? No?
No, ma'am, nothing on the chat.
Okay, thank you. Linda, you may proceed.
Okay. So then the last thing that we wanted to present is a next step. Of course, tonight, June 8th, we're having our public hearing. And as I telegraphed at the beginning of the presentation, according to the board adopted timeline, you do have scheduled next week a redistricting committee meeting on June 16th. Of course, if there are no public comments tonight, requesting a change to map 6A, or any trustee concerns or comments tonight requesting a change to map 6A, the redistricting committee doesn't feel that it needs that meeting on the 16th and would ask the board to consider its recommendation to cancel that meeting and for us to progress to June 29th, which is the date that you've scheduled on your timeline for final adoption. At which time both map 6 and 6A can be presented to you for adoption, or if you just want map 6A, that is the board's prerogative. It is the recommendation of the redistricting committee, since map 6A does unsplit some precincts, and that is a criteria, that be the map that the board considers. Any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay.
So much.
Oh, I think I see a question from Trustee Sullivan. I think he's raising his hand.
Trustee Sullivan, please.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. McBride. Thank you, Chair. I do have a few comments to make before we get too far. I didn't want to lose the chance to make them. They're general comments, not specific to anything in particular right here that we've been discussing. And they'd be appropriate now or later.
Yes, I'm sorry, Trustee Sullivan. Yes, you can go ahead and make your comments.
Okay, thank you. I will make a motion later as the agenda calls for considering canceling the next meeting, but that would be out of order right now. So first of all, I want to apologize for not being there in person. I'm out of town on business, long scheduled trip, and just was unable to be there. So I apologize for missing the meeting. Just a reminder, as Ms. McBride said, the redistricting committee has been composed of myself, Trustee Murillo, and Trustee Pierce. And I just want to be on record and for the public to know that the committee as a whole, if you will, all three of us have been highly engaged. We have participated in almost every single meeting. There might have been one or two that we were unable to attend, either in person or virtually. That's the community forums, that's the redistricting committee, that's a special board redistricting committee. We put a lot of time as a committee, not just me, but as a committee, we put a lot of time into this. And I want to add that the committee's taken every opportunity possible to ensure that District 7 was represented. We asked hard questions. We wanted to see the data. We wanted to see the numbers. We actually dove into the precinct splits on District 7. And the reason we did that, for those who don't know, is that District 7 is vacant right now. So I want to thank my colleagues on the committee for their commitment to ensuring that District 7 was represented, and not at the expense of any other district, but they certainly were not left behind. And when you get right down, excuse me, when you get right down to it, it's my opinion that this has really been a data-driven process. There's been no politics. There's been no agenda. There's been no favoritism. The redistricting committee has been collegial and productive, and it's just been our desire to do the right thing, to follow the guiding criteria, guiding principles that the board adopted, and we remind ourselves what those are. We make sure that we follow them. And then I also want to take a minute to thank, I haven't done this publicly, but I want to thank excuse me, the legal team, Ms. McBride, Ms. Martin. I want to thank the demographers, Rocky and Matthew, who have been available and highly engaged. They have been responsive when I asked if we could modify the color of the font for the Montgomery County precincts. As silly as that sounds, they said, sure, we think we can get that done. Hey, can we add a dotted line between the counties? Sure, we can get that done. So they've done a really good job, and their data's been accurate. It's been very impressive. And as we've asked for changes, both as trustees and as committee, as redistricting committee, they've made them, and they've just made things happen. And then also want to thank Lone Star College personnel for maintaining the website, receiving the comments, taking phone calls, inquiries, coordinating meetings and changing meetings, and OTS, the IT department, the police that were out of the community forums. And then I'd like to just make sure that Trustee Murillo and Trustee Pierce have an opportunity for any comments that they may want to tag on to or just bring up themselves. But they've just been great to work with, and I really mean that. It's been a very collaborative process. And when we started, I didn't think that we could get here, to be honest with you, but here we are. It's been everyone working together. So sorry for the long speech, but these are important comments for me to make.
Thank you, Trustee Sullivan. Those are very, really good comments. Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, this is Trustee Pierce. I'd like to make one comment, please.
Yes, please, Trustee Pierce.
Okay, I concur with everything that my colleague Trustee Sullivan had to say. This was a great learning experience. It was much, I learned a lot. And let me say, it was great to work with the committee. It was also great to work with Attorney McBride and her colleagues. They were very gracious, and had it not been for their expertise, we would not be at this point now. I commend them. And that's it.
Thank you, Trustee Pierce. I think we have a comment, Trustee Murillo.
Yeah, I know that at our redistricting meeting last time, I expressed my appreciation for the work and for the guidance. Explained, I've said this a couple of times, that in many ways for me, it's been like a legal symposium on the issue, right? So, sometimes repetition is important, and we have like reassurance that we're doing the right way, that we're following the law, and that we're considering all aspects of the requirements. But yeah, I definitely want to commend you and your staff, the demographer as well, and of course it takes a Lone Star College personnel to bring it all together. So thank you guys. I appreciate that. It's a long winding road, and we're getting close. So yeah, just like thanks. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Trustee Murillo. Trustee Sullivan, you still have the floor. Any other comments?
Thank you. No other comments, just when I'm looking at the agenda off to my left. So if you see me glancing away, I'm trying to figure out when I can make the motion for canceling the June 16th meeting, but I'll wait until the chair tells me it's okay to make the motion.
Thank you, sir. If you can turn on the,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and we just want to make sure and note that Trustee Vogt is present.
And I also want to thank everybody and to admit that I have relied on Chairman of the committee, Sullivan, and Ms. Pierce and Ms. Wilson to weed it all out. Much of it was not fully understandable to me till now, in looking back at from the finished product to the starting place and your explanations of all of the steps that we were required and chose to take. I too wondered if it was possible, Mike. But thank you all, district professionals. I am well pleased. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Vogt. Thank you so much. Any other comments here on the floor? All right, so hearing none, I just want to really congratulate both of you, your team. Let's see, Paige, Lisa, Matthew, and Rocky. I don't know where he is, but if he's hearing us somewhere, so thank you so much. this extremely good presentation, and we really appreciate you listening to us and our comments and listening to the public comments as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, if we could move, I don't know, do we continue the presentation or what's?
Mr. Castillo, do we need to adjourn the public hearing and convene just for the special meeting?
Well, before we do that, I do want to make an announcement. I think our next item is an announcement for the June 29th meeting. So just to make sure, I want to make it public that the board will vote on adoption of the final redistricting map on Wednesday, June 29th at 5 p.m. Thank you so much. And I guess we adjourn this section. Thank you. So we adjourned this redistricting section and now we reconvene to the special meeting on redistricting. There we go. I don't think we're going to close session tonight. And so our next item is the approval of the minutes of the April 13, 2022 special meeting on redistricting. So I hope you had an opportunity to look over. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
A second?
Second. Second.
It's been moved and properly second. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Please note that I abstain.
Trustee vote abstains. Item passes. Thank you. And so now we have, I don't think we have the another presentation of the maps, correct? Okay. So we're going to move on to the consideration and possible action of amending the redistricting meeting schedule. And Trustee Sullivan, I'll go ahead and lay the floor for you on that, please.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to read this so I get it right. Chair, I move that the Board of Trustees amend the redistricting committee schedule for the redrawing of the college's single-member districts to remove the redistricting committee meeting scheduled for June 16th, 2022, because of the progress been made to date, lack of public comment at this meeting, and lack of changes requested from trustees during the public hearing as well. Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All right, it's being moved and properly second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? So the action item 1 passes. Thank you so much. And our next item is the suggested future agenda items, but because we're not going to have a meeting on the 16th, we will forego this particular item. But I do want to open up just in case if you have any questions currently based on what was presented currently. So hearing none, it is 6:01 p.m. and the chair adjourns this meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.